Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Thursday. It's the 17th day of April, 2025, and we have two important stories that have come across the wire since we talked to you last. Donald Trump actually responded to the New York Times story about a potential attack that would have taken place the first week of May between Israel and the U.S. fighting Iran, a surprise attack, and with many of the details that were supposedly top secret. And then Hamas has rejected again Israel's proposal to release the 10 hostages in exchange for a 45-day ceasefire. Now, this is not surprising. It's sad because, again, we had the story from both the U.S. and Israel that we're really close to a deal. And you just feel for the hostage family, but Hamas turned it down because Israel basically insisted that Hamas, surrender all its weapons and leave Gaza. And Hamas says we're never going to do that. So it looks like, just like with the Iran thing, it goes on and on and on and on, and who knows when it'll end and what'll happen. Anyway, this first story, this is really interesting. Here's what Trump said. I wouldn't say I waved off Israeli plan to attack Iran, but I'm not in a rush. So this is where we're at right now. This is interesting. U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday he was in no rush to greenlight strikes on Iran, the day after a New York Times story revealed his administration had quashed an Israeli proposal to do so. The comment came as Iranian and allied officials prepared for a second round of talks with the U.S. on Saturday, aimed at reaching a diplomatic agreement surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. Oman confirmed on Thursday that the talks would take place in Rome, putting to bed earlier Iranian claims that the talks would again be held in Muscat. That's, of course, in Oman. Now, asked about the report that he had waved off an Israeli plan to strike the Islamic Republic's nuclear sites next month, Trump said, I wouldn't say waved off. But then he said, I'm not in a rush to do it, indicating a degree of confirmation of the report. In other words, from what we're getting, the Jerusalem Post had a long article too that said they knew about all these things the New York Times reported, but they couldn't, for secrecy purposes. But now it's out in the open. So, yeah, they knew about the plan. And so I guess what they said, well, I read the article, what they said is the New York Times seemingly got most of the story right here. This is what was planned that was going to happen in October as a joint attack. But one of the secret things, though, wasn't supposed to be revealed. Along with the bombing attack, there were supposed to be commandos, Israeli commandos, that would hit the ground in Iran and basically destroy some of the underground sites, for having cover from the United States of America, to be able to do that. And so that was, confirmed today by the Israelis and by the Jerusalem Post. And so this story here, this is the Jerusalem Post story, by the way, also, and they're all reporting the same story. But anyway, Trump today was speaking to the reporters in the Oval Office, and as always, he gets reporters' questions. And he said he reiterated he wants Iran to live happily without death, whatever that means, but that it can't have a nuclear weapon. Iran is wanting to talk. It would be very good for them if they do. If there's a second option, I think it would be very bad for Iran, he added. The Islamic Republic, which has sworn to Israel's destruction, let's not forget that, insists its nuclear program is for civilian purposes only, which nobody believes, but it enriches uraniums to level far beyond any civilian use and obstructs inspectors from visiting its nuclear sites. That's because for the last 20 years they've claim their goal is to destroy Israel, the little Satan, and us, the United States, the big Satan. And so nothing's really changed there. Netanyahu then touted countless acts against Iran's nuclear program. He came out and said he's done many acts against Iran's nuclear program over the years, did not deny the report that Trump had blocked the strike, preferring to negotiate a deal. It's the first comment that Prime Minister's office had on the New York Times report. And it said in a statement, Prime Minister Netanyahu has led for more than a decade the global campaign against Iran's nuclear program, including when some people downplayed the threat or called it a political spin or the prime minister paranoid. Countless actions, overt and covert, in the campaign against the nuclear program. And only because of those actions, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon in its arsenal today. In other words, what they've said, basically, Iran has been set back years from some of the things Netanyahu has done. In fact, this is the claim set back about a decade because the determination that either covert or overt things that Israel has done to Iran. And so, again, the heart of the secret here, this is one of the headlines. Channel 12 on Thursday quoted a senior Israeli official, security official, at bristling at the leak to the New York Times, which included details of the planned attack and its timing. He said the leak was dramatic and could damage our close relations with the American administration. The heart of the secret with respect to Iran was leaked. The methods of operation, the timing, the coordinating mechanisms, the element of surprise. This does real harm to Israeli interests regarding Iran. The network also cited unnamed Israeli diplomats who warned that the U.S. and Iran could be galloping to a bad deal within a short time frame. According to the report, the initial plans for the strike would have combined a joint Israeli-American bombing campaign with Israeli commando raids on underground nuclear sites and included U.S. airstrikes to protect the teams on the ground. The broadcaster reported Thursday, however, that Israel believes, now get this, that U.S. leaked the information in order to pressure Iran in the negotiations. In other words, we're ready to attack and we're on hold here. So you better start talking about some of these things. Now, this is going to be interesting because Saturday, of course, we've got another meeting. We'll see what comes out of that and see if anybody budges. All right. What's also interesting, too, the bunker buster bombs. Con News also reported that despite Trump's veto on a joint attack in May, the U.S. has continued in recent days to send Israel huge shipments of ammunition, including bunker buster bombs intended to make possible a strike on Iran's nuclear sites. In just the previous 24 hours, the network reported Thursday night 9 military transport planes had arrived at the Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel carrying hundreds of bombs, including bunker busters, to allow a strike if negotiations fail. Earlier this week, Khan reported that dozens of American planes have been arriving in Israel carrying heavy Mk-84 bombs and interceptor missiles for the THAAD air defense system. So they're still preparing as though an attack will take place. And this is what's interesting. And so we don't know if it will, but it certainly could. And Israel's getting supplied for this. And then you've got this problem. Here's part of the problem. And this is the next heading, is part of the problem why there's been some halting with respect to the Americans and why some of the advisors of Trump have told him, we want to put the brakes on this. It's the Russians and the Saudis. Iran also continued to maneuver for influence ahead of the talks. Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei sent forth his foreign minister, Abbas Abgarchi, to Moscow on Thursday with a letter to Putin to brief the Kremlin about nuclear negotiations with the U.S. Now, Russia is a long-standing ally of Tehran and plays a huge role in Iran's nuclear negotiations with the West as a veto-wielding UN Security Council member. In other words, they could veto anything that the Security Council comes against Iran with. They're a signatory in an earlier nuclear deal Trump abandoned in 2018. Regarding the nuclear issue, we've always had close consultations with our friends in China and Russia. Now it's a good opportunity to do so with Russian officials, Arachi said to the Iranian state television. And he said he was conveying a letter to Putin that addressed regional and bilateral issues. Putin later received the man Agachi in the Kremlin. Now, what's interesting here, Moscow had bought weapons from Iran in the war in Ukraine and signed a 20-year strategic partnership deal with Iran earlier this year, though it does not include a mutual defense clause. The two countries were battlefield allies in Syria for years until their ally Bashar Assad was toppled in December. Now, Russia has said any military strike against Iran would be illegal and unacceptable. The Kremlin didn't decline comment. We talked about this. Would they take their enriched uranium, would hold it if they moved out of Iran for a third country? And so the Saudi defense minister kind of chimed in the same way. He's glad they're talking rather than fighting. And this is why some of Trump's, inner cabinet, people who are advising him have said, look, it's going to cause some problems with Russia. It's going to cause some problems with Saudi Arabia. We're trying to do some things there with respect to Ukraine, with the Saudis, with the Abraham Accords and that. So you don't want to rock the boat too much. And so this is why Trump, it seems, is in a position right now. This is the bottom line of the story. He's not in any hurry. He's waiting to see what happens with the so-called negotiations. So maybe something, if we'll see what happens on Saturday. If anything comes up to make it sound like they're making any progress. I don't see how it could be because Iran has said our nuclear program is off limits. You can't talk about that. You can't talk about our missile program. We're not going to stop enriching uranium. We're not going to stop developing missiles because it's for our self-defense. Also, they said, well, if we could have why can't we have a nuclear missiles if Israel's got them? Because Israel does have, we don't know how many, that's top secret, but they do have them. And so it's interesting how all this is playing out. So the bottom line in all this, uh, U.S. instead of responding to Iran negatively, Trump says they want to talk. Okay, but all their talk is we won't do this, we won't do that, and we want to talk. We want our sanctions reversed that you against us, so our economy will go better. So again, we wait and see, but at least he spoke about it. So that's our story. And then Hamas, again, this is sad. They've rejected Israel's proposal to release 10 other hostages and for a 45-day ceasefire. They will not accept, they said, any partial deal that serves Netanyahu's political agenda. And so the terror group just said Netanyahu wants to continue the war. So basically, as we thought, they turned it down because they're not going to accept any plan that calls for their demise, obviously. So again, we have a stalemate there too. So in these two main areas where there's negotiation going back and forth, there doesn't seem to be any way either of them can come to some type of conclusion. So what's going to happen? Well, we don't know. There's going to be what we do know from scripture, like we said, Iran will be an opponent of Israel at the time of the end. There's no doubt about that. They'll have some military prowess, but they won't be the military leader in the Middle East. That will be Russia. They're going to, if the fact that would join a Russian coalition, according to Ezekiel 38:39, means they're not going to be, on their own enough to lead a coalition. No one's going to follow them, and no one did. That was one of the things we talked about from the beginning of this when they did the October 7th massacre in 2023. They're expecting everybody to come on their side. Nobody did. Hezbollah didn't even come on immediately, which that would have caused Israel horrific problems if it would have been invaded from the north. Other countries, other Arab countries, Muslim countries would not come on board. So Iran does not have that much credibility with these countries. But what they do have is that credibility, or at least we're working better in the negotiations with the Saudis and, of course, China and Russia, which complicates everything. So where are we at on this? Well, here's the bottom line. This is one of these stories that, I have to keep looking at every day. And what we do here is just report what the stories are. It's very frustrating to because it keeps going on back and forth. In fact, there are a number of stories today. I almost did a couple of the articles with all these people trying to figure out why was it leaked? Was it leaked to scare Iran into making, concessions right now? Was it leaked because everybody's got a different theory here. We don't know. And so what we try to do here is avoid any type of speculation. Whatever the case may be, the story was leaked. It is not a huge surprise because, like we said, other outlets knew about this, and Iran probably had a good inkling of what was going to go on too. So we'll just wait and see. The good news is, and this is why we do these programs, that everything's moving towards the end, which the Bible talks about very specifically what's going to happen. And very specifically, these things are falling into place. With the U.S., like we said, in fact, another story today in Syria, moving its troops out of there, the U.S. will not be a player in last days Bible prophecy. All right, so we're going to be less and less interested in the Middle East. There's other fish to fry, such as China and the Far East, and so that's going to be our concern. And so we're seeing all this happen. Israel being isolated. Israel can't seem to get a break or win in any way, shape, or form. And so we're not surprised by all of this. And so we're watching it take place and reporting to you every day what's going on. But when we do this, so many other things, like we said, from this angle and that angle, is falling into place miraculously that you really can't make this stuff up. Anyway, that's it. So bottom line is two stories. Hamas says no to this ceasefire agreement. So these people again are heartbroken. They thought they would get 10 more hostages released. And then of course Trump saying, "Oh, no, I didn't wave off an attack, but I'm not in any hurry." So the time just keeps passing by. So we will see. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow's Good Friday with not only breaking news, but also with our program, Your Bible Questions Answered, as we continue our series on the events of Holy Week and talk about the meaning of tomorrow, Good Friday. And hopefully, with everything else going on in the world, with whatever's going on in your life, you're thinking about this week, what happened some 2,000 years ago in the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, because without that, none of us would be here. We wouldn't have the hope that we have. And so we'll talk about tomorrow in some detail what happened on Good Friday. And uh, and again, thank God that this happened because he died in our place so we don't have to suffer for our own sins. I'm Don Stewart again. Thanks for watching. Until then, may the Lord, as always, richly, richly bless.